We begin in the eastern Mediterranean on a windswept hill in what is now western Turkey, for the story of a legend that historians spent centuries dismissing as pure invention. For generations, scholars insisted the Trojan War was nothing more than a poet's daydream, a tale of gods and heroes with no more truth to it than a bedtime story. Then a stubborn businessman named Heinrich Schliemann arrived with a shovel and a copy of Homer in his pocket. Let's freeze on that moment, because if you blink, you'll miss the instant myth collided with dirt. Beneath the mound at Hisarlik, he found not one city but 9, stacked on top of each other like the rings of a tree, each one burned or shattered and rebuilt. One of those layers showed the scars of fire, collapsed walls, and scattered arrowheads. Suddenly, a story everyone laughed at had an address. So what really happened at Troy? What we know is that a wealthy city guarding a crucial trade route was destroyed by violence more than 3,000 years ago. Whether it fell to Greek raiders over a stolen queen or simply to greed and a broken alliance, the bones of the legend are real. The wooden horse may be metaphor, perhaps an earthquake credited to the sea god, but the war behind the myth left ash we can still touch. Now travel with us to the bottom of a memory shared by nearly every ancient people on Earth. From the Mesopotamian tale of Utnapishtim to the biblical Noah to flood stories told in India, Greece, and the Americas, humanity seems haunted by the same nightmare. Water rising, the world drowning, a handful of survivors clinging to a boat. For a long time, this was treated as a moral fable and nothing more. But 2 marine geologists studying the Black Sea noticed something strange in the sediment. There was a moment, roughly 7,500 years ago, when the sea appears to have surged inland with terrifying speed. The theory goes that as the last ice age released its grip, the Mediterranean rose until it breached a natural dam at the Bosphorus. The freshwater lake behind it was swallowed by saltwater in what may have been a catastrophic flood, drowning coastlines where people had built their homes. Imagine watching your fields vanish under water that climbs higher every single day. A disaster like that would not be forgotten. It would be carved into memory, passed down through 100 generations, growing larger and holier with every telling until a regional catastrophe became the story of the whole world ending. We take you now to a bright island in the Aegean and to a name that has launched 1,000 obsessive searches: Atlantis. Plato described a magnificent civilization, wealthy and proud, that angered the gods and sank beneath the waves in a single terrible day and night. Treasure hunters have looked for it everywhere from the Caribbean to Antarctica. But some experts believe the answer was hiding in plain sight, much closer to Plato's own home. The island of Santorini, once called Thura, was home to a dazzling Bronze Age culture with running water, multi-story buildings, and vivid painted frescoes. Then, around 3,600 years ago, the volcano beneath it erupted with unimaginable force. Let's freeze on that. The blast tore the island apart, buried its city under meters of ash, and launched waves that battered the coast of Crete, crippling the powerful Minoan civilization. A rich island culture swallowed by the sea in a geological instant. Our experts face off over whether this is truly Atlantis. Skeptics point out the dates and the distances don't perfectly match Plato's account. But others argue that a story told and retold across 1,000 years would inevitably shift its numbers and its map. The verdict? Atlantis as a literal continent remains unproven, but a proud island civilization erased by fire and flood is not a myth at all. It is a page in the geological record. Let's turn our attention to a creature so terrifying that a single glance from her turned men to stone. Medusa, the snake-haired gorgon of Greek legend, has frozen imaginations for millennia. But where does a monster like that come from? Some researchers believe her roots lie in something achingly human. Sailors and travelers in the ancient world sometimes encountered people afflicted with terrible diseases, faces distorted, and told stories to explain the horror they felt. Others suggest the petrifying gaze recalls the very real terror of coming face to face with something that could kill you where you stood. A coiled viper in the grass, its stare the last thing a victim ever saw. And there may be something even older at work. Ancient people across the Mediterranean dug up strange stone shapes in the earth, the fossilized bones and shells of creatures that no longer walked the world. To a mind without a word for extinction, a spiraling ammonite or a fanged skull was proof that monsters had once been real and had been turned to stone by some awful power. The myth of Medusa may be many fears braided together, but every strand of it began with something people genuinely witnessed. We travel north now to the frozen world of the Norse and to their prophecy of the end of all things. Ragnarok told of a great winter with no summer, 3 years of unbroken cold and darkness before the final battle of the gods. It sounds like pure apocalyptic fantasy until you look at the tree rings and ice cores from the 6th century. Around the year 536, something plunged the northern hemisphere into a shocking chill. The sun dimmed, crops failed. Contemporary writers described a haze that hung over the world for more than a year. Scientists now believe a series of enormous volcanic eruptions filled the sky with ash, blocking the sunlight and triggering a genuine, deadly winter. For the people of Scandinavia, whose survival depended on short growing seasons, this would have been an existential terror. Whole communities may have starved. Is it any wonder they wove that trauma into a myth about the day the sun disappeared and the world was consumed by cold? The disaster was real. The gods were how they survived remembering it. Now consider the dragon, that universal beast that guards treasure and breathes fire in the legends of Europe, China, and the Middle East alike. How did so many separate cultures, with no contact between them, arrive at the same impossible monster? Our experts have a compelling theory, and once again it involves people digging in the dirt. The ancient world was full of enormous bones eroding out of hillsides and riverbanks, the remains of dinosaurs and giant prehistoric mammals. A person who unearthed the skull of a protoceratops in the deserts of Central Asia, all beak and frill and claw, had no framework of paleontology to explain it. They had only their imagination and the obvious conclusion. Here lay the bones of a dragon. Across continents, people were finding the fossilized proof of creatures far larger than anything alive, and the dragon was born from the honest attempt to explain them. The fire and the hoarded gold came later, but the beast itself crawled out of the fossil record. Finally, we return to where we began, to the idea that has run beneath every story tonight. That the myths our ancestors told were not lies and were not simply entertainment. They were memory. They were the way human beings, without written records or scientific instruments, stored the most important lessons they ever learned. A flood that drowned the coast, a volcano that darkened the sky, a war that ended an age, a creature whose bones made no sense. These events were too enormous to forget, so people did the only thing they could. They gave them names and faces and gods, and passed them down until the facts softened into wonder. When we dismiss a legend as a fairy tale, we may be throwing away a genuine eyewitness account, encoded in the only language that could survive 3,000 years. So the next time you hear an ancient myth, listen a little closer. Somewhere inside the monster and the miracle, there may be a real disaster, a real power struggle, a real moment when the world changed and someone was there to remember it. The gods may be invented, but the earthquakes, the floods, and the fires that inspired them were absolutely real. And if you know where to dig, you can still find their fingerprints in the stone.